Yo, what's up everybody? Isaac here coming to you with another New World video. So today's video is going to be my new favorite do-it-all build in Season 2. And that is going to be using our Greatsword and our Warhammer. And why is this build such a great do-it-all build? Well, it has incredible utility, incredible survivability, but yet we can do amazing amounts of DPS. So let's get into it. First off, we will cover our gear and all of that real quickly. So this specific walkthrough is going to be on the Lazarus, and Lazarus is currently a nature mutation. Nature mutations, the enemies, they have some built-in healing and all that good stuff, and there's some roots that go on, so we'll talk about things that we do to combat those specific things. But all around, this build is going to be awesome for all the different types of mutations. We just do a few things just slightly differently depending on the specific mutation. But anyways, so we have a few pieces of this Sun Lord's gear. 3 pieces to be exact. It is all light gear. You can get away with 5 pieces of it, but ideally you'd go 4 pieces and a chest piece, or something like that. What we want to do, we want to get this green bar as high as we can without surpassing this 13.0. because we are a light DPS. If you're trying for that endgame DPS PVE content, you must be light. You want to aim for 5 con. So let's go over this a little bit more. So you obviously have to have the ward, ancient ward. Sunlord stuff, you can farm this from the Ennead. Unfortunately, it can be hard to find people to run Ennead, but nonetheless, that's where it drops. That's where you can get this particular gear from. Pretty darn good. Not necessarily best, but it is very, very good gear. So we have Ward, Shirking Fort, which fortification isn't incredible on light armor, but it helps you, so it's not bad. And then we have Refreshing Evasion. Preferably Refreshing would be better, but Refreshing Evasion is still pretty legit. So we have 3 very viable perks on this gear, so you cannot go wrong with this set. And this is one set that I just happened to get. I don't remember if I bought this one or if it was a drop, but it's a medium, and we have dexterity. Either dexterity or strength is what we need. No constitution, because we are endgame PVE DPS, which means no con. So extremely nice thing about this piece, Relentless Rush. Relentless Freedom comes in extremely handy in nature dungeons and in ice dungeons. If we get rooted, we go ahead and we activate our Relentless Rush, and suddenly we're unrooted. Getting rooted can make you go down quite often inside of dungeons, so incredibly awesome. If you do not have it the first time you use it in an ice dungeon or a nature dungeon, well, you will not want to live without it again. So one incredibly important part about this build, we have this Relentless Freedom, and it's best to have it on your gear because you're not losing anything by having it on your gear. Some weapon perks, you lose some by it being on your gear instead of your weapon, but the only reason we need it, activating Relentless Rush removes root. So it's going to remove the root whether it's on the weapon, whether it's on the gear. So let's just get it on the gear and save the weapon for a better perk. So gloves, boots, also the Sunlord stuff, and our pants, well, we just have a piece that's Ancient Ward and Refreshing. So 2 perker, that's extremely good. You could have 5 pieces that are Ward and Refreshing, but hopefully you have 1 piece with that Relentless Freedom, like I mentioned. So that kind of covers the armor there. And our jewelry, of course, we must have nature protection and health. And we gotta either have dexterity or strength, just the way it is. Our ring, you must have a damage ring, just the way it is. You gotta have a damage ring. If you're trying to be endgame PVE legit, you have to have a damage ring. This Legate's ring, anybody can get it. free, just gotta go farm it. I don't remember exactly where it drops, but just search it up. Legate's Ring, newworlddatabase.info, you'll find where it drops. Slashing damage, keen awareness, and leeching. Extremely strong. Love this ring. Very endgame go-to ring. Gotta have that extra slash damage for our Greatsword. Extra 4.9% slash damage. We got strength, so there we go. Extra chance of critical chance. Definitely cannot go wrong with that. The other ring that I will often use, and I'm really not that concerned which one I use. They're both very good, but this one is also incredible. Simon's Hacksilver ring. You can get this from the Stone Barrows mutation, but slash damage, leeching, and hardy. So if we're wearing that ring, it just gives us a little bit of extra stamina. We don't need it because we already have 3 dodges. So this is definitely the preferred ring, but the Simon's Hacksilver is also extremely legit. And then our earring. 2 things you must have. Refreshing Toast, Beloved, and then Strength or Dexterity. If you can get a 3rd perk, awesome. If it can be refreshing, that would be Biss. But can't always get absolute Biss 3 perkers on everything, so this one is incredibly strong, really high-end piece of jewelry here. So that's what we're looking for on our jewelry. Now our weapon. With this build, we are always looking for Trenchant Strikes. Fully charged heavy attacks deal plus 20% damage. Obviously, you gotta have the Bane. And then this Mortal Refreshment, it's not that great, but this is a free sword to get. It's a named item. Once again, go look it up online. You'll find easily enough where it drops from. So, 2 main things here. Bane and Trenchant Strikes. We're gonna be building this build all around heavy attacks with our Greatsword. Mortal Refreshment, reduce all cooldowns by 10% on a kill, so that we don't have a problem with cooldowns on our Greatsword with this build. So this perk means basically nothing, but sure, it's something anyways. And then in our gem slot, Electrified Gambit plus 12% damage while your stamina is not full. Hits inflict surge, dealing 8% lightning damage per second for 2 seconds. So this is the Biss Runeglass case. But the thing is, many people are going to be running this, so it doesn't hurt to do a different one. Instead of Electrified Gambit, maybe you run Empowered Gambit, because you can only apply 1 type of dot per group to the same mob. So if you have 3 teammates all with this exact same one, well, you're not going to be making the best of it. So some people, they'll just throw opposites in their weapons, say an Empowered Gambit in their Ancient. Even though it's not Bissed out, it's going to do a little bit less damage, but just to have a less likely chance of stacking the same as somebody else in their group. But at the end of the day, you cannot go wrong with this one, because sometimes you're going to be hitting a different mob than your teammate is hitting, even if they have the same one, and well, you'll get those dots on that different mob. So there we go. Our Greatsword, we are charging up our heavy attacks, and we automatically lose stamina while we're charging up. We'll talk more about that later in the build, but that's why this one is the go-to for your Greatsword. And then our hammer. Well, you can see I have a taunt gem in here, but that's because I do a lot of tanking as well, so I just swap out my gems on this one. I need to go farm a second one of these so I can just permanently slot a gem, but it's whatever. So on this, we have Sundering Shockwave. This is extremely nice to have. Ancient Bane, obviously a must-have. Thwarting Strikes, it's very good. It's not that important, because we're just using this for utility. We're not using it for damage, but any extra damage we can get out of it, it's beneficial. So it's pretty strong to have this Thwarting Strikes, because a lot of the times we are going to have grit while we are using our hammer. There's plenty of times that we aren't, because we don't do heavy attacks specifically with this build, and we don't have grit only on heavy attacks, not on light attacks. But anyways, there you go. Bane, Sundering Shockwave is the main thing we're looking here, and it has to be Strength or Dex. And once again, on our Greatsword, this one has Dex, so we are good to go. And For our Heart Rune, in the nature dungeon, it's good to have at least 1 or 2 people that have this Cunning Heart Rune of Bile Bomb. That's because in the nature dungeons, there are, the enemy's got a little bit of self-healing going on. But you reduce that healing by 30% for 8 seconds when you use this Bile Bomb. But this is a good one to use using your leeching. I'll show you the 3 different ones that I basically use. The other one I'm going to use, Brutal Heart Rune of Detonate. You can't hardly go wrong with that. Or the Grasping Vines. So this one's just going to do a ton of damage is basically what it comes down to. You'll take extra damage while it's charging up, but it's also going to do a ton of damage. And then Enfeebling Vines, this one's all about rooting the enemies, and it's all about adding Weaken to the enemies. So you definitely always want somebody on your team with a variety of these. So the other one that is extremely good for, a healer or a DPS is Brutal Heart Rune of Firestorm, and that is because it will inflict weaken, and it's also going to do some damage. And the nice thing about it is it's basically a ranged attack. You can shoot it through just a huge line of mobs and add weaken to them from a distance, where, for example, the Leech and Vines, it's only directly around you, and well, you're not going to really stack weaken. So if you're applying 2 different weakens, so anytime you can have, just try to line up with your team. Hey, which Heart Rune are you running? I'll run the other one. So there you go. That's kind of the Heart Runes. We covered our armor, our jewelry, our weapons, Heart Rune. So let's jump. Let's go and deal with the attributes. We're always going to go to 300 strength with this build. Why? Because this build is being centered around heavy attacks. And if we read the print there, plus 10% base damage to heavy attacks. Absolutely must have with this build. And the other one, plus 25% chance to mine an ore with a single swing. Not a must have, but is actually extremely helpful when you're running through a dungeon. And if you get that to perk and you can mine an ore in one shot, it saves you a lot of time. So awesome. And ideally 5 con, the rest into dexterity, and this comes in very nicely. Very, very strong perk to hit 200 dexterity if you can, plus 10% bonus backstab and headshot damage. So we're not going to get backstabs on the final boss in Lazarus, and there's many times where we're not going to be getting backstabs, so it's not like an absolute crucial thing. So it's not crazy important to have, say, backstab on one of your weapons, which we don't have any ways on our weapons. But this is also obviously extremely helpful. Anytime you do get those back hits, you get an additional 10% bonus damage. So very important when you can get down to 5 con. And you're thinking, well, running Greatsword and 5 con, plus when you have Greatsword, you take extra damage as it is. Well, we're going to show you how this can still have incredible survivability, even though we're running 5 con Greatsword. So, but also, we're not just sitting in defiant stance all the time, either just playing the safe route and getting reduced damage output and reduced damage incoming. So, we are now going to talk about the tree here. So, there's a couple different routes you can go with picking a little different perk here, a little different perk there. But this, once again, like I mentioned, this is centered all around the heavy attacks, so we're not taking crosscut, we're taking everything that's going to help us do extra damage for the most part. So anything that adds damage plus utility. So we're taking Relentless Rush, dash through foes while spinning, and apply 20% slow for 4 seconds on a hit. Kind of nice to have that slow if we're just running through mobs, and well, we can hit them with that. They get slowed, so they're not going to dash after us really quickly. But it also does an acceptable amount of damage, 110% weapon damage, and then 120 with the second hit. So that's pretty dang nice, to be honest with you. And then after, we gain 10% power for 10 seconds after we hit a target. So that is pretty darn beneficial right there. So let's cover a few of these other things we're taking here. Increased base damage. This is one that, honestly, I don't take that often, but come to think of it, it is pretty nice. We come up to a mob, we get off a nice charged heavy attack when they're at full health, or maybe we hit them once with Relentless Rush, but they're still above 90%. So we get a nice big heavy hit off on them, and we do an additional 15% damage. Increase base attack damage by 15% when attacking foes that are above 90% health. Most people aren't taking this, and honestly, for the most part, I haven't taken it either. But kind of weighed things out, and I decided I'm going to try this and see how it feels. So I've been running it for this week and just playing with it, seeing how it feels. But the other one I do love, you do not need this one, but Aggressive Shift. Enter Onslaught stance by hitting with a charged heavy attack. Wow. Yes, you can time your skills, so you don't necessarily need this one, but it's still going to come in handy, because sometimes after we run our train of skills, and there's a very strong reason for this, because, well, after we use Roaring Rupture, we go into Defiant Stance. And in Defiant Stance, we are going to do less damage. So, why do we want to use Roaring Rupture while we're in Onslaught? Well, there's two things. We want to use Skyward Slash when we are in Onslaught. We want to use Roaring Rupture when we are in Onslaught. It's not always going to work out perfectly, but, kind of the typical thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up with Relentless Rush. We're going to go ahead and hit them with this Skyward Slash, and then we are going to use our Roaring Rupture, and then after that we're in Defiant Stance, but we want to get back into Onslaught Stance, so we hit them once with one charged heavy attack, and just like that we are in Onslaught Stance. So why is it kind of important that we use that specific order of skills? Well, we use this and it does put us into Onslaught Stance. Let's read the word in here. Skyward Slash. Swing up in a brutal arc, staggering your target, dealing 50% weapon damage. So it's very weak as far as doing damage, but it applies 2 stacks of 5% rend for 10 seconds. And then if we are in Onslaught Stance, we apply an additional rend. So unless we are in Onslaught, this is not going to get that third stack. Obviously, it's not make or break to have 15% instead of 10%, but it is still nice. So we do try to use this skill while we are in Onslaught Stance. So we can either hit with a charged heavy attack, and then all of a sudden we're good to go. We can use this skill. Or we can go a Relentless Rush, and then we hit them with that, and we're good to go. And then we want to gather up the mobs with Roaring Ruptures. So let's go ahead and read the information on this one. Roaring Rupture. Stab the ground and send out a shockwave with a 4-meter radius that deals 120% weapon damage and gain 10% fortify for 7 seconds for each foe that we hit. Max of 3 stacks, so we can get up to 30% fortify. Very, very helpful. So, and it's also a respectable amount of damage, 120% weapon damage. And it does generate threat, and it has grit. So you gotta be a little bit careful of that whole threat thing. But typically when we are using this, we are surrounded by our teammates, we're surrounded by our tank. So you have all kinds of help with CC and a tank that's grabbing threat as well. So usually you're using this in a situation you're not too worried about that extra threat generation. So cleanse 2 debuffs. After using Roaring Rupture, not really that important for, the way we're using this. Mutations, debuff cleanses, you cannot cleanse the mechanics of the mutation, so it's not like incredibly important. Sure, there's probably a couple of debuffs that it can cleanse and be helpful, but it's not that important. But what we're looking for is the ability to come down here. We can't come down here unless we select this. So these are, obviously just this skill by itself is very strong. Gives us fortify, and it does some damage, so nothing wrong there. But this is where it starts to get really good. The shockwave applies a 10% weaken for 10 seconds on hit. And additionally, after a successful hit, become uninterruptible for 5 seconds. So everything about this is incredible. 10% weaken, that's not huge, But the reason it's so nice is, well, weaken does not stack. So if somebody hits the mobs with one type of weaken, but we hit them with another type, it's the more is the better. So just every little bit helps. If somebody hits with one type of weaken, then we add another type of weaken. Well, that's awesome. So anytime you can add any amount of weaken, even if it is only a 10%, it's huge. But we also come uninterruptible for 5 seconds, which is incredible. Sometimes when you're getting staggered around, it can cause you to get killed because, well, you can't escape from a mob if you need to, or else if we're just trying to output some heavy damage, we might get staggered and we can't get our heavy attacks off, and, well, not ideal. So then we read here another very important one. In Defiant Stance, the shockwave pushes foes outward, and in Onslaught Stance, the shockwave pulls foes 3 meters towards you. So ideally, we want to be hitting while we are in Onslaught Stance. So once again, this aggressive shift, it can be handy to make sure that if for some reason this is on cooldown, well, we hit them with a heavy attack, and then we're good to go. We can hit them with this adaptive rupture, and we are going to pull foes towards us. So it's not quite as good as a gravity well, but with our greatsword, we have tons of built-in cooldowns, so we can get those cooldowns off really fast, and we have that very nice crowd control with very short cooldowns, and we will talk more about that as we continue. So that's kind of the synergy of why I'm taking this specific perk. So I'm kind of bouncing around a lot here, but there's a reason for that. Obviously, I wanted to let you know the different reasons why I take this aggressive shift and how the synergy can work with these skills. So we hit this, we get a nice chunk of fortify, and if we absolutely need to, we use this. And if you don't take this, you will be in Defiant Stance, so you'll have even more survivability after you hit them with the Roaring Rupture. But the only problem is we are going to be doing less damage. So when we're on the Greatsword, we want to always be in Onslaught Stance because it's all about outputting heavy damage. So that is why I take aggressive shift. Many don't, but personally I love it. It's kind of a go-to for me. So let's keep talking about the rest of the passives over here. So charged heavy attacks have 15% armor penetration. So basically that just means it's going to do more damage. It's hard to calculate exactly how much more, but, well, more armor penetration, we can just assume it's going to do more damage. After gaining Onslaught Stance, your next attack within 5 seconds has a 100% increased critical hit chance. So Greatsword doesn't do like crazy amounts of critical damage. It's only a 1.25% multiplier. Not terrible, but not extremely high, but it's still worth it in my opinion. That means you're going to do you're a guaranteed 0.25% more damage on your next hit after you enter Onslaught Stance. And we are typically doing hard charged heavy attacks, which are already going to do a lot of damage. So if it's going to do guaranteed additional critical damage, we cannot go wrong with that. So haste, I absolutely love haste, but just kind of a weights and balances type of thing. Just other perks that I'm liking better. Become energized by landing a critical hit and regain 5 stamina and 5% base health per second. So this is obviously nice. With this build, we naturally use tons of stamina, and anytime we can get some natural health regeneration, it's always a good thing. Critical hit chances increased by 10% when attacking foes with an active debuff, which basically is all the time. There should almost never be a time you're hitting a mob that doesn't have a debuff. Every time, the first time you hit a mob, you're hitting them with a debuff, just the way it is. After dodging, gain 10% empower for the next 3 hits within 10 seconds. So This is obviously pretty darn nice. An additional 10% power free just for dodging. Attacks empowered by this effect restore 10 stamina on hit. And the ultimate. Hitting foes reduces Greatsword cooldown. Light attacks 2%, charged heavy attacks 10%. So this is massive because this build is all about doing heavy attacks. So when we're doing those heavy attacks, our cooldowns, they just come off so fast that it's like we almost have endless amounts of abilities to use these two skills. So although Roaring Rupture, it's not quite as good as a Gravity Well, and look at that 19-second cooldown, it disappears just like that after we do, 3 heavy attacks or something like that. So we just have tons of crowd control with this build. We can gather mobs out and then we can stun them with our Warhammer. More on the Warhammer later, of course, but let's keep going with the Greatsword. So let's read this part right here. After completing any ability in the Onslaught tree, enter Onslaught stance for 10 seconds. Onslaught stance has the following properties. Outgoing damage increased by 15%. This is the reason we want to always be in Onslaught stance while we're using our Greatsword for the most part. But one problem, damage taken is increased by 15%. Well, if we're in a state of increased damage incoming, how do you say this is such a versatile build? Aren't you going to die all the time? You're 5 con. Well, we have to play smart. And the hammer is part of this build that helps add survivability for us. We're adding weaken with the hammer, we're adding weaken with our Greatsword, and we're also playing smart by attacking on the opposite side of the mobs as the tank when we can. We're also making sure we CC the enemies when we need to, and well, we're just playing smart all the way around. We get this fortify with this Roaring Rupture, and if we use Roaring Rupture, one way we can add a little bit of a safety net. Do not take aggressive shift. You get yourself into a sticky situation. You hit the enemies with Roaring Rupture, and you enter into Path of Defiance. So I suggest not trying to rely on this, but as you're getting started, it's not a bad way to practice because damage taken is reduced by 15%. Outgoing damage is reduced by 15%. So not ideal. We're losing 15% outgoing damage, but we do have a reduced incoming damage of 15%. And then guard point block incoming attacks while charging heavy attacks. So lots of survivability on the Greatsword if we are in Defiance stance. But ideally, you're working to that point where you are not making use of this Defiance stance. So very important you work towards the point of always being in Onslaught stance. So let's read the rest of this. Quick charge, heavy attacks charge, 50% faster, so massively important, but they consume 10% stamina each. So that could sound like a little bit of a downer that you're using stamina, but when you consider this Rune Glass that we're using, Electrified Gambit, plus 12% damage while your stamina is not full. So this is just guaranteeing us to have that additional 12% damage. So the reality is that this heavy attack consuming 10 stamina, it's just guaranteeing us to do extra damage. We don't even have to dodge to guarantee that extra damage. Sure, with this perk here, after we dodge, gain 10% in power, it can help us do extra damage, but a lot of times it's faster to just hit them without trying to gain this extra 10% in power, because obviously while we're dodging, we're not doing damage, but we can just kill things faster by making sure we're doing continuous damage instead of, obviously dodge when you need to, but the more we can just continuously output damage and utility, the better. So we do not have to dodge to make this additional 12% damage perk, so that comes in incredibly handy for us. the fact that we consume stamina when we are in onslaught stance. So the other huge thing obviously is the heavy attacks that charge 50% faster. So when we are in onslaught stance, the combination of faster heavy attacks and heavy attacks reducing our cooldowns, it just makes Greatsword so strong. So let's cover the rest of the tree here. Getting kind of long-winded on it, but it's important to know all these different things. So sometimes I will take the rest of this tree. It is very nice, but it just comes with weights and balances thing once again. I could definitely drop this perk, and I could drop this perk and pick these two up. That would be very strong, but I do absolutely love to have this perk here. So we read here, add a follow-up attack that deals 140% weapon damage by activating the skill again or using a light attack. So that is pretty nice. 140% weapon damage, that's pretty huge. And then if we come all the way down here, the first attack applies disease, which reduces healing by 20% for 10 seconds. That actually can be massively important, like in a nature dungeon where, the mobs have some healing, or else in Iniad, the Forge, where there's a bunch of healers, but it does only apply to whoever you hit with the Skyward Slash, which isn't like a big AoE. You're basically just hitting one mob, or however many mobs are stacked exactly on top of each other. And, well, it definitely still can be helpful, but this is what makes it really nice. The follow-up attack strikes all foes within a 3-meter radius. That's massive. So if we read this, 140% weapon damage, then 140% weapon damage to a 3-meter radius. That's pretty massive. But the thing is, we're already doing massive amount of damage with our heavy attacks. And with the greatest sword, your heavy attacks, they have such a wide swing. Like everything in your path is getting hit there. So the first attack, it doesn't hit as wide of a range of enemies, but then your next two attacks, such a wide range that, well, as nice as this skill is, because 140% damage done to a 3-meter radius, that's huge. But the thing is, we're already probably hitting a 3-meter radius with our heavy attacks. So that is why I opt out of taking this one now. I do love it. I have taken it many times. I love that big, huge slam. It's just fun to do. It's fun to watch. But reality is, we're just as well off to get on with hitting our heavy attacks. We go ahead and we try to apply that 15% rend, and then we go to town doing damage with our heavy attacks. So covers the onslaught side. Let's see what we're taking in defiance side. We already talked about this one, so we won't go over that again. But the ones we're taking here, after gaining defiance stance, you will also gain fortify, increasing your armor by 25% for the next hit taken within 5 seconds. Well, this one's not a must-have by any means. You definitely could get rid of this one because it's going to apply for such a short amount of time. But the reason it is so handy, when we are using Roaring Rupture, well, one problem. We are a light DPS with 5 con. Roaring Rupture, we're pulling all of the enemies into us. So if there's enemies on all sides of us, sometimes we can trap ourselves in the middle of a bunch of enemies. And the way it pulls them in, it doesn't like stack them hard on top of us. It's not like as strong of a stack as the Great Axe does, but still, sometimes it can get you in trouble. So after we use this, it puts us into Divine Stance until we do another charged heavy attack. So gaining this 25% fortify for the next hit, it can be pretty darn helpful. Not a must-have, but it's handy to have just for that little extra survivability since we are that 5 con DPS. Base damage is increased by 3% for each Greatsword buff on you, so additional damage, that's not going to be a bad thing. We're entering, obviously we're going into onslaught, we're getting empower, so we're going to have stacks of, it's going to apply nicely to us. So we're going to get some good damage increase by taking this perk here. Always a good thing. And then charged heavy attacks have grit and inflict bleeding for 6 seconds, dealing 5% weapon damage every second. This one's just massive. You're taking it no matter what. For 2 reasons. Charged heavy attacks have grit. Awesome. You do not want to be getting stumbled around while you're trying to attack. It can cause you to not do damage, and it can cause you to get taken out. Because you lose control, well, you are getting staggered, but if you have grit, you're not getting staggered, so good to go. But that bleeding is massive too, so this is just a no-brainer. Always taking these 2 here. There's a couple different options as far as other things you can do. Another thing you can do just for a safety net that's going to give you a little extra survivability, and honestly, I would suggest you go this route as you're initially practicing for survivability, but as you move on, you want to use this point somewhere else. Right here, guarded shift. Block for 2 seconds, causing you to enter defiant stance. So when you're in defiant stance as a greatsword, well, you have an additional reduced 15% incoming damage. Obviously, we don't want to be in it because we're going to lose outgoing damage. But as you're learning greatsword, this can be very viable to take just because it's going to give you that little extra survivability. So as you level up your skills, you don't want to be wasting a point on this one, but not a bad idea to take getting started off. So that rounds off our greatsword tree. So let's go ahead and check out our hammer. Oops, that's not my hammer. This one is my hammer though. So this is what we are taking. It gives us some really strong utility and some really strong survivability. So armor breaker. Pretty sure this got increased. It used to only be 20%, I believe, but now it's 30%. That's a massive amount of rend. So really strongly suggest in the current meta you have at least 1 player on your team running. Powerful swing that penetrates 35% of the target's armor and deals 160% weapon damage. So this ability actually does some pretty crazy strong damage. So nice that it does some extra damage, but the main thing is, well, this big massive 30% rend. So that's what it's all about with taking armor breaker. Just massive amounts of rend that you can apply. So what else are we taking on the left side? We're not going to go crazy in depth with all this. There's a few different options you could do, but we're just going to cover what we're taking. Increase armor penetration by 10% for all Warhammer basic attacks. Not an absolute must-have, because our hammer, it's all about utility. We're not trying to use it to do damage, but it's whatever, a little extra damage when we do a light attack. So adds grit to Warhammer heavy attacks, also grants 12% damage reduction while grit is active. And all 3 of these skills, they now have grit. So when we use one of those skills, well, 12% damage reduction, which is pretty handy to have. So shockwave, absolutely taking shockwave. Slam your hammer into the ground, causing a 3-meter radius earthquake that deals 6% weapon damage. It does such a minimal amount of weapon damage. It's not about the weapon damage it does, but it's all about stunning the enemies. And the other thing it's all about is, well, you look at our hammer and Sundering Shockwave. Shockwave inflicts rend, reducing target's armor by 14% for 10 seconds. So we get the 14% rend here, and we get 30% with the other abilities. So there you have it. Just with our hammer alone, we're doing 14 plus 30. So we're doing 44% rend just by ourselves with the hammer. That's pretty dang massive. There's tons of utility here because adding tons of rend, but plus here we have the stagger and the stun. We hit enemies with our shockwave and we stun them all. So helps give us incredible survivability and utility. So we have the greatsword, which, you know, we take extra damage with the greatsword, but once we add in the hammer, Well, it adds survivability. We get ourselves in trouble, we pull out our hammer, and we stun everything. We can go ahead and hit them with clear out and knock them down, add some more survivability, not only for ourselves, but also for our teammates. So we're adding tons of rend, we're stunning the enemies, so lots and lots of utility with this build, lots of survivability, lots of output damage. Adding tons of rend, and then we're pulling out the Greatsword and doing heavy damage. So, outnumbered. Increase armor by 20% if surrounded by 2 or more enemies within 3 meters, pretty much all the time when we got our hammer out. So, one thing that's kind of janky about this thing, kind of weird, it's easy to miss enemies sometimes. With this armor breaker, you kind of get... It's just silly. You're going to have to practice with it. You're going to miss it quite often, but it does have a pretty low cooldown and all that good stuff. But it's whatever. So just one thing I wanted to throw out. It can be a little bit weird feeling to use, but anyways, let's keep going. After hitting a target with effective debuff, gain haste, increasing movement speed by 50% for 3 seconds. Haste is nice. It can get you in and out of trouble as you need to, a little bit faster. Not an absolute must-have perk, but I would take it because it's all about utility. Having some haste gives us a little bit extra utility. So we're gonna have to speed through here. We got this patch coming in that's gonna shut us down, but clear out. A wide swing that just knocks down targets. Really awesome ability. Get ourselves in trouble, or we just got a big stack that's, well, we just go ahead and knock them down. Lots of survivability it adds for us as, a DPS. Keeps our team alive when we're a bunch of 5-con DPS, when we can keep knocking them down when we need to. Hit a target with clear out, we get fortify, increases armor by 20% to all our friendlies within 6 meters. So knocks down all of the enemies, but it also adds fortify to us and our friendlies, so that's pretty massive. Clear out's cooldown is reduced by 5% per enemy hit with the ability. Extra cooldown so we can knock them down again. Very nice. Using clear out grants us haste. Once again, allows us to speed in and out of things really fast. And whenever a target is affected by a crowd control effect, they are slowed by 20% for 4 seconds. So that's nice. It's not massive because by the time the enemies come unstunned after 2 seconds, or after they stand back up, it's only 2 seconds left of slow, but it's still helpful. That just means for that 2 seconds, they're going to have that much harder time tracking down our teammates and taking them out, tracking us down and taking us out. Just gives us more time to react. So I do like to have this perk here. We only have 2 abilities with crowd control. The other one is just for adding rend. But let's finish these last off real quick. Reduce damage taken by 10% while sprinting. So, while we're sprinting through mobs, pull out our hammer, and obviously we're trying to dodge, we're trying to not get hit. But if we do get hit, we got our hammer out, 10% less damage we take. Deal 50% increased damage against targets affected by Warhammer debuffs. Not bad, Once we are at 300 strength, we are going to do respectable amount of damage with our Warhammer. So say we get ourselves into a sticky situation and we don't want to have our Greatsword out, we don't want to be taking additional damage because we're in a sticky situation. Pull out your Warhammer. Anytime we can get a little extra damage out of our Warhammer when we have it out just for survivability's sakes, definitely a bonus. This perk is very nice. Heal for 35% of damage dealt with when you use a Crowd Crusher ability. Obviously, that's just these two. This is not a Crowd Crusher ability, but can be very nice to top us off. We get ourselves in trouble. One, we stun them or knock them down, and then we also get some healing. So we get in trouble, we get low health, we pull the hammer out, and we stun and knock down the enemies for 1, but 2, it helps give us some self-healing. So we get low health, we get in trouble. 1, we knock them down, but 2, we get some additional healing out of the deal. So very, very nice perk here. Then, reduce Warhammer cooldowns by 7% when using light attacks against targets with an active debuff. Honestly, we're not ever trying to use this because we're just pulling out the hammer, we're using our abilities, and we're switching back to our Greatsword. But we do find ourselves in a sticky situation where we're afraid to pull out our Greatsword because we don't want to take on additional damage. Well, this is going to be helpful because it's going to bring our knockdowns back a lot faster. just by hitting with these light attacks. So there you have it. That is our hammer tree. You know, we talked about our greatsword, we talked about our attributes here. I guess one thing I didn't mention really is our gem. What are we putting in our hammer? It's not that crazy important, but you know, typically what I end up, even though it's not necessarily the greatest one because we're not always gonna be at less than full stamina, usually I just carry a stack of these 2 gems, cut pristine carnelian, cut pristine opal, and I'll just, you know, they're not crazy expensive gems, so typically I'm just gonna go ahead and swap one out for the other. The other option you could use, cut pristine diamond, plus 50% damage when you're at full health. So a lot of times as a DPS you can be at full health, you're sitting in a heal and you're not. Ideally the tank is getting the focus of the damage, so a lot of times you can be at full health, but it's kind of whatever. You know, one thing you can do is put a lightning gem in your hammer, but you know, if you can get the extra 15% damage, you're going to do a little bit more damage than having the lightning, but the lightning is guaranteed extra damage versus ancient. So another option you can do, but typically I run a lot of tank, so I use this one as my tanking weapon as well. I should go ahead and farm a second one of these, or I should find a second hammer to be specifically my tank weapon and another hammer to be specifically my DPS weapon, so I can go ahead and put ruin glasses in each one and permanently leave one for tanking, permanently leave one for DPS. But it is what it is. It's not that massively important because our greatsword is for damage and we don't need to squeeze every last incy-bincy bit of DPS out of our hammer because it doesn't compare to what we're going to do with our greatsword. So that covers the build, so let's go ahead and jump into the walkthrough. So we are off, and there's going to be a really important tip right at the beginning here. So right here, pay attention. Tank runs through, I just stop, I wait. I make sure I don't steal any aggro, don't die like the other DPS died. Make sure the tank has all of that line of sight aggro. You're trying to do that endgame dungeons, well, it's really important that the tank isn't forced to stop, use any abilities, use any taunts right away. Let him line of sight everything, let him get that easy aggro, let him pull it to where you're going to stack, and then jump in, go ahead, drop your knockdowns, and go to town, just DPS and things. You can see I'm using my Rends, I'm using my Armor Breaker to apply stacks of Rend every time I can. And you see in this run right now, I do have my Leeching Vines on. I do not have that Bile Bomb that I talked about. I can't remember if I ended up switching it out during this run. But you can see we jump in, we go ahead, we hit them with our Roaring Rupture, which is going to add Weaken. You know, we weren't in the Onslaught stance yet, so we didn't suck the enemies to us, but we do still apply that Weaken even if we are not in Onslaught stance. So we're making sure as much as we can we're on the opposite side of the stack as the tank, and then we're just kind of going to town DPSing. We're going to go ahead, we're going to use our ability, our utility of our hammer, we're going to do some knockdowns, we're going to apply some Rend, and right back to town with our greatsword. You know, we're going to apply the Rend when we can, you know, right again. Once our armor breaker's back up, we're going ahead, we're applying that nice stack of Rend. I'm going to go ahead and lock everything up when it spawns in with our Leeching Vines, and see, we get ourselves into a little bit of trouble here. We get stuck behind enemy lines. We used our Relentless Rush and it got us in trouble, so we don't want to die, very important. So we're blocking until we can get out of that little situation, and then we're back into mess of things, you know, applying some DPS. So you can see we're cycling through. Our abilities come off cooldown. We're going to go ahead, we're going to reapply Rend. We're just going to go back to town with our heavy attacks on our greatsword. Because we have that one perk where we're automatically going back into Onslaught as soon as we do a heavy attack, well, we don't have to worry about using our ability first. It's nice if you can use the ability, you know, use your Rush so you can get that Empower. go ahead and use your Skyward Slash so you can apply some extra rend. But worst case scenario, we just start doing some heavy attacks and we're going to do some good strong damage. One thing that's really important, when you get that green circle around you, everybody on your team needs to touch it. If the DPS don't touch it, they do 50% less damage. Healer doesn't touch it, he does 50 less outgoing damage. Unfortunately, on that time, I failed to go and touch my healer. He definitely could have ran up and touched it himself if he was paying attention, but you know, if I was really on top of things, I would have noticed, wait, the healer didn't run up to me, I should run back to him, because if he has 50% less outgoing healing, better chance of somebody getting knocked, somebody dying. So see, you know, we powered through this first part fairly easily. We had one guy that went down early, but no full deaths yet anyway. So once again, you got that green circle, make sure you touch it, try to make sure your whole team touches it. And, you know, obviously, if you're trying to speed through things, obviously you want the tank to get in there right away. But whatever, it's not like we were absolutely going for a leaderboard run, so he was grabbing loot. If you really are trying your best to go for leaderboard runs, the tank almost has to be dedicated to not gathering loot. A lot of times when I'm doing my runs, if there's a loot bag that's handy to grab, you know, when I'm tanking, I'll grab it. But if I gotta waste time grabbing a loot bag, which unfortunately, oftentimes as a tank, if you're staying behind to grab loot bags, you are wasting time. So that's one unfortunate thing as a tank, where a DPS, typically you don't want to be the first one in anyways, so it doesn't hurt you to stay behind and grab your loot bag, because you want the tank to, you know, move on to the next group first so you don't steal the aggro. But just one unfortunate thing as a tank, if you are going for those, you know, every second matters. If you're trying to get at the top of the leaderboard, other people are going to do it. They're going to be willing to skip loot in order to get leaderboards. So just the way it goes. Sometimes as a tank, you just have to keep moving on, skip out on that loot. But regardless, it's not like we were expecting this run to be a specific leaderboard run, so we're trying to do good, you know, shooting for sure a gold run anyways, trying to speed through things, get a decent score. But it's what it is. It's very hard in pubs to get a team that's, you know, willing to full sell out on going for leaderboard runs. So I think right here, yep, I realize that, yeah, I definitely want to have that bile bomb, because, you know, with all of the extra rend that we're applying, we are still mowing through the mobs, but it is noticeable how much longer it takes to kill things in a nature mutation, because of the built-in healing that they have during a nature mutation. But you can see we're starting off with our hammer, we're starting off with our knockdowns, we're applying our 44% rend that we can apply, then we're going to add more rend with our greatsword, then we go to town, you know, just doing damage, constantly cycling through our skills. When they're ready to go back up, we're going to use our abilities on our greatsword to gather the mobs and add weaken. We're going to add weaken and rend with our hammer, and just incredible survivability with this build. So you get the best of almost all worlds with this build. You get to apply a decent amount of weaken, because you apply weaken with your greatsword, and you apply weaken with your hammer shockwave. So Roaring Rupture applies weakened. Shockwave applies weakened. Your hammer and your greatsword both are applying good amounts of rend. Well, your greatsword only 15% rend, but still, it's something. But our hammer, we're applying, like I said, up to 44% rend with that. You know, another possible 15% with our greatsword. So just like that, we can be up to almost 60% rend applied just by ourselves with this build. Incredible survivability, because we have good crowd control, we have knockdowns that can help us and our teammates survive. One thing that's really important to note, anytime I can, I'm trying to stay on the opposite side of the mobs as our tank. The problem is, when you have all of this mess, you have, you know, heals going off, and you have all kinds of commotion. Sometimes it's hard to see exactly where the tank is. So I went in with my Relentless Rush, trying to add some empower, but you really only get it if you hit the mob. But I realized that, oh no, that archer's way too close to the edge. I'm going to rush right off the edge. So I was just rushed into the middle instead. One very important thing here, you can see as I go in on this boss, I pop my tier 5 Ancient Ward Potion. Extremely important. This boss, he hurts quite a bit. He takes out a lot of groups. So we go ahead and we pop our Ward 5 Potion. You can see we get hit with a slam. We get hit with another slam. Well, we're surviving pretty easily. But if you need to, we got our hammer. We got 2 knockdowns. And when you keep knocking this boss around, it means he has less chances to hurt your team. So you could see, even with my Greatsword out, I'm at 5 con. We're applying tons of weaken to him. We went and popped our ward potion. A lot of people, they get taken out by this guy's slam. But we're getting hit with that slam, and our damage, our health, it's just not even going down that much. That's what happens when you are smart about using your ward pots at the right timing, and you're smart about applying lots of weaken to the boss or to the mobs. Well, it's deceptive just how survivable you can be at 5 con when you play smart, when you're adding lots of weaken, and when you are using your ward pots in a smart manner. So if you've ran Laz M10, I'm sure you've ran with plenty of groups that have gotten wiped out by that boss, but even at 5 con with our Greatsword, he's just not doing that much damage to us. So you play it right, well, even at 5 con, you can have incredible survivability. So that's why this build is so incredibly strong. We're applying lots of rend, we're applying reasonable amounts of weaken, and of course we have our tank that should have his shield rush that's going to apply weaken. We got a spear that's going to apply weaken, and just lots of weaken all around provides tons of survivability. So not so much gonna go super in depth with the team builds. We're gonna do another video, kind of about survivability as a whole and all about secrets to 5 con DPSing in dungeons. But go ahead and subscribe and make sure you keep your eye out for those videos as well. But so yeah, it's all about just cycling through our abilities. We make sure that we're keeping rend applied. Like I said, we can apply like 60%, just crazy amounts of rend. Almost up to 60% of rend. So when you apply 60% rend to mobs, and then you hit them with a bile bomb so they can't heal up, and well, we have our charged heavy attacks doing like 10k, sometimes even get up to 11k hits. Stuff just disappears really, really fast. So once again, we have our hammer out. We're going to open up with armor breaker. For the rend, we're going to hit them with shockwave to make sure we got the weaken plus rend from our rending shockwave ability. And then we just go to town with our Greatsword. We have our ability up, so we go ahead and drop it on the boss for a little bit of extra damage and so on and so forth it's gonna do. But other than that, same concept. We're just cycling through our abilities, making sure we're applying rend and weaken every time it's available to be applied. We got ourselves almost into a little bit of trouble there. We did get hit by his little javelin toss thing, but luckily, even though we're 5 con, we had enough weaken as a team applied to him that he still did not kill me. So there you go. We're just cycling through our abilities. We go ahead and we do our Relentless Rush, so we get the Empower. We go ahead and we apply all of our stacks of rend, and then we just go to town doing heavy attacks. See a lot of, we're getting some 8k hits, 9k hits, but on a really good hit we get 10, and I have even seen up to 11k hits with this build. You kind of need to be stacked out on all of your empowers, and you need to be stacked out on you know, the rends and everything before you're gonna do those 11k hits. So everything needs to be perfect. You gotta hit a nice crit hit, but they do happen occasionally with this build where I will hit up to 11k. So just really super basic. Just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. We go ahead and we relentless rush. You gotta be super careful about that with this boss. There's definitely been more than one time when I've accidentally relentless rushed right through the boss and I accidentally end up where the tank is, and well, you die because when you're 5 con getting hit in the back by the boss, well, you just die. It's just the way it is. So gotta be really careful when you relentless rush. You can hit just his tail, rush through his tail. Don't try to rush through his body, and you're gonna be good to go. So in these cages, we have this newfangled way where somebody found out, go ahead and place an ice pylon on the very first one. 4 people come up to the top. You just mow these mobs down super fast. Tank stays the middle, you know, just survives down there while we mow these mobs down. He doesn't have to survive for too long. You know, typically I say healer should drop his sacred on the tank only and hit us with his additional heals. You know, I think he did hit us with the very first sacred, but ideally just keep dropping the sacred on the tank. Looks like he has the sacred on the tank now anyways, but with 3 DPS up here, we should definitely not need a sacred. Drop your additional heal, sure, but just like that, we mow these mobs down super fast, and well, now we come help out the tank. You get in here, make sure you take out all the archers first. So one awesome thing about this strat is you don't have to worry about killing every last mob in this dungeon, because when you use this strat you get tons of extra mob kills, because as you kill the mobs, more spawn in, so you get to, everybody gets into the middle really fast and you can just mob down just tons of mobs. Get your mob count up so you can afford to skip mobs. At the beginning, you don't have to worry about getting all the kills before the portals close. You know, as you go through the halls later on, you don't have to worry if a few mobs get left behind and you skip them. You know, just go ahead, do some skips, and well, with this strat, you can afford to. With the old strat where you do 2, 1, 2, sometimes you wouldn't get tons of extra mob kills, and sometimes things would get tight, but very, very handy since somebody learned you could place an ice pylon on one of those weight plates and it would stay activated, and now just makes these cages super easy. So you can see here, same thing as normal. We're just cycling through all of our skills. We're applying all of our knockdowns, and we're applying all of our rends, and we're gonna go to town. So here, kind of important that once the archer is aggro, we do need to take him out. If it's just a melee guy, we could just drag him along to the next group. But the problem is the archer, sometimes he'll he'll follow us in, but then he'll snipe somebody from out here. So it's waiting for the team to come catch up. We're gonna go ahead and jump right on up here. You know, we do have our knockdowns, so we can CC this guy until our tank gets here. So as long as you know what you're doing, you know, with the hammer, we have our knockdowns, we have our stuns, so we can get there first, go ahead and apply our knockdowns, and we're not going to die. And other than that, we wait for the team to get here, stack things up, and just mow them down. Applying our weaken, applying our 2 rends, and then we're right back to town doing damage. Apply our rend with our Greatsword, and we're back to town doing heavy attacks. Just keep cycling through. Make sure when you have a rend ability that's ready to go ahead and apply it. If we got our bile bomb up and we got a stack of mobs or we got a boss, just go ahead and shoot it on him so he can't keep healing back up. when you got 60+% rend and tons of weaken built up throughout the team, stuff dies fast, your teammates don't die. That's the secret to surviving easily with 5con in the M10 level. Make sure you stack up tons of weaken, have different forms of weaken throughout your team. Make sure you're applying whatever weaken abilities you have as often as you can. See right there, you can see just how handy that 300 strength came up. I went ahead and was able to mine that ore with one single hit. And once again, our teammate that was trying to mine the other ore, he was about to get attacked, but since we have shockwave on our hammer, we have that ability to go and interrupt them. So tons of utility with this build. We can go ahead and help our teammate out. You see he was about to get in trouble. We just pulled out our hammer, shockwave, stunned all of the mobs. They can't hurt our teammate. So definitely crazy strong build. Incredible utility. Greatsword, one of the best DPS weapons in the game. It might not be the absolute ultimate most highest possible DPS in the game. You know, the bleed rapier probably wins that one out, but it applies massive AoE damage with those wide range heavy attacks. They sweep such a great big area that you can just do massive amounts of damage to huge stacks of mobs. Slices and dices right through everything. So, moving right along, just stacking things up, hitting them with our weaken, hitting them with our rend, getting our empower built up, and just going for those heavy attacks. You can see the bleeds stacking up, you can see, you know, our ruin glass, those ticks are going off as well. So you can see most of our hits, they're only like 95k or so when we don't have that purple circle. It's typically not until we have that purple circle when we start getting the 10k plus hits. And of course we have to have all of our rend stacked up on them as well. So still respectable. See, there's a nice 10.5k hit. You know, not quite that 11k, but still a very strong hit. You know, 11k seems to be about the max you can get. If you're hitting more than 11k with your greatsword, let me know. I'd love to know how you are managing to do that. And I'm certainly not consistently hitting 11k like I mentioned. It's just when we have full empower built up and the mobs have full stacks of rend on them. So, one awesome thing about this greatsword, it isn't quite the same of the gather ability as a great axe, but still we can gather mobs nicely. We have these two archers, they're kind of spread out. You know, we do some damage, but then when we can, we go ahead and we use our shockwave that not shockwave, that's what our hammer does, but our roaring rupture, I think it's called, and we pull the mobs to us. So, one important thing I guess I didn't mention in the build, the very last boss, Chartis, he does strike damage, and being 5con, being greatsword, we need to make sure we put on a strike protection amulet. Absolute must. Otherwise, if you do not put one on greatsword, as soon as you get into that onslaught stance, chances are you're going to get one tapped if you do not have a strike amulet on. So very, very important. You should see here shortly. I didn't show you, I don't think I showed you the strike amulet, but shortly when we go into the boss, I'm gonna make sure I put my strike amulet on. And unfortunately, the strike amulet I put on is strength instead of dex, I think. Or it's the opposite. Yeah, it's a strength one. And the one I had on is dex. So I do need to respect, because, well, the most important thing is that we are above 300 strength. The 200 dex doesn't matter as much since we cannot get back hits on this boss. But We do get diminishing returns at some point, so it's good if we can, you know, put the rest of the damage into dex. Once you start getting above 300 strength, you get diminishing returns, so we do also get damage on the Greatsword from dexterity. So once you get beyond 300, 310 strength, just make sure you're putting the rest into dex. So you're going to see, even though we're often in our onslaught stance, the stance that we're going to take additional damage, we're 5 con, we got a strike amulet on, but we're still having some reasonable survivability against Chartis. So we're going to open up with our armor breaker to apply that nice 30% rend that's going to apply to everybody on the team, and we are going to go to town, dropping off those heavy hits. I think the highest number I've seen me get on him is 50k so far. I don't think we've seen any 50k hits there, but that's the highest number I've seen so far from him with my Greatsword. A nice 50k crit hit. So if you hit anything higher than that, once again, let me know. Love to know what you're doing differently to get even more damage yet. But seems like that's got to be somewhere around what we are tapped out at. So the rune, the heart rune, I guess you're probably better off to use the explosive when he goes down. But I don't know, does he take damage from those ultimate abilities or not? I've never been able to see on screen him take damage from it. So, you know, you would assume it should hit him. But I don't know. Let me know. Does it absolutely for sure work when you do damage? I usually do always switch over to my Brutal Heart Rune of Detonate just to get that extra bang of damage. But I did forget to switch it this time for the boss, but that's life. We still managed to get him down reasonably fast here, so there you have it. Nice, solid run. Absolutely love this build for Lazarus. There's some different builds I like better for some of the different dungeons, but this wasn't a top of the leaderboard run by any means, but nonetheless, nice and clean, very strong run. Hope you liked it. Hope you found something that might help you out some. And I appreciate you stopping by. We will catch you on the next one.